What if the world questioned your worth before you even spoke a word? Picture this a calm morning at the airport. Two polite black teenagers settling into their seats, excited for their first trip alone. Then, suddenly, accusations, whispers, and a flight attendant demanding they get off the plane. No shouting, no chaos, just disbelief and the sting of being told, "You don't belong here." Now imagine you're their father. You've built a company that serves millions. Yet, in this single moment, your children are treated like trespassers in a space you helped create. Do you stay silent, or do you act for Christopher Bennett? Silence was no longer an option. What followed wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning that would shake the entire airline industry. Because sometimes, it takes one moment of injustice to reveal the truth about who we are, and one calm voice to remind the world that dignity doesn't need permission. Would you have done the same? Would you have stayed quiet or grounded the flight? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about an airplane. It's about every place we've ever been told we don't belong. Please like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that touch the heart and awaken the conscience. The terminal smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel. Morning sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, painting long golden streaks across the floor as people rushed toward their gates. Two children, Maya and Micah Bennett, 11-year-old twins, stood quietly near gate C-19 clutching small carry-ons and the same navy blue travel pillows shaped like clouds. They looked identical, except for the tiny scar above Micah's left eyebrow and the braided ribbon in Maya's hair. Their ticket said Aureus Air Flight 882, first class. They weren't ordinary kids on a vacation. They were the children of Christopher Bennett, the CEO of Aureus Air, one of the biggest airline companies in the country. But nobody at the gate knew that. The twins never bragged about it. Their father had raised them to move quietly, to let kindness speak louder than titles. That morning, their guardian Aunt Naomi had been stopped at security for a random bag check. She waved to them through the glass, mouthing, "Go ahead. I'll catch up in 2 minutes." The twins nodded, walked to the gate together, and handed over their tickets. "Good morning," Maya said softly, offering a practice smile. The gate agent scanned the tickets. "Beep, beep, first class, seats 1A and 1B, she confirmed. "Welcome aboard. Kids, everything was fine until they reached the cabin." The first class section shimmered with quiet, luxury cream-colored seats. The smell of leather and citrus wipes, gentle music playing overhead. Passengers were settling in, men in suits, women scrolling through tablets, a few sleepy travelers with eye masks half on. The twins took their assigned seats near the window. Micah pressed his face against the glass, whispering, "You can see the whole runway from here." Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman frowned. She looked at their uniforms, then at her glass of orange juice, then pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared, a tall woman in her late 40s with perfectly neat hair and a rigid smile. Her name tag read Carol Hensley. "Yes, Ms. Davis." Carol asked the passenger politely. The woman tilted her chin toward the twins. "Are they supposed to be up here? First class is expensive." Carol turned. Her smile stiffened. "Excuse me, kids, can I see your boarding passes?" Maya handed them over with both hands. Carol scanned them, then glanced back at the twins. "Who purchased these tickets for you?" "Our dad," Micah said. "He's meeting us in Orlando." Carol's voice cooled. "Uh-huh. And where's your adult now, Aunt Naomi? She's at security. She told us to board because the agent said it's okay. Carol's lips tightened. Children aren't allowed to board alone in first class without an accompanying guardian. You'll have to step out of the cabin until we verify this. Maya frowned, but the gate agent already checked. Carol cut her off. Sweetheart, I don't make the rules. A few passengers looked up from their phones, whispering, watching. Micah sank lower in his seat. We didn't do anything wrong, he muttered. Carol sighed and leaned closer. Her perfume smelled like sharp vanilla. Listen, honey, these seats are for confirmed passengers, not for standby or special upgrades. Okay, I'll call someone to sort it out. She tapped her intercom, requesting supervisor verification in first class, possible seat misallocation. Maya's small hands clenched. We have real tickets. Carol straightened. Then there's no reason to be nervous. Right. Her tone made it sound like an accusation. At that moment, a young flight attendant, Maya Torres, walked by. Her eyes caught the children's frightened faces. Everything okay? Carol, she asked. Carol replied without turning, It will be. Just confirming something. But her voice carried enough edge that the surrounding passengers began filming quietly. One man whispered, That's messed up. They're just kids. Another murmured, Bet this goes viral. Carol ignored them. She turned back to the twins. Gather your bags, please. We're going to step outside for a minute. Maya shook her head. We promised our aunt we'd stay in our seats. Carol's jaw flexed. I'm not asking again. She reached down and grabbed Micah's backpack strap. The boy yelped in surprise. Stop! Maya cried, standing up. You can't do that. Sit down, Carol snapped. Her voice echoed through the cabin. The music stopped. Every head turned. The first-class passengers fell silent, caught between disbelief and discomfort. Some lifted phones higher. Others simply stared, paralyzed by awkwardness. Carol called out toward the cockpit. Captain, we've got 2 minors refusing crew instructions, requesting ground assistance. Micah's lip trembled. We're not refusing. You're hurting us. Maya took a deep breath, the way her father had taught her when she got nervous before school presentations. Count to 3. Find your voice. She reached for her smartwatch and pressed the quick call icon labeled Dad. The call rang once, twice. Her father's voice came through, low and calm as ever. Hey, sunshine, you boarding okay? Maya swallowed. Daddy, the lady says we have to get off. She won't believe we have tickets. Silence crackled for half a second. Then his tone changed. Put me on speaker. Carol blinked. Who is that? Micah whispered. Our dad. Sir, Carol said sharply, I'm handling a boarding issue. Please stay off the line. But the voice that came through the speaker wasn't pleading. It was measured, steady, each word carrying authority. This is Christopher Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of Aureus Air. He said, I'm currently at Terminal C, Conference Room 12, and you're speaking to my children. Carol froze. The passengers gasped. For a heartbeat, only the hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Christopher continued, his voice quiet but unmistakably firm. Tell me your name. Please. Carol Hensley, sir. Carol, he said. I want you to listen carefully. My daughters were authorized to board under Company Protocol A147. If you lay another hand on them, you'll be removed from service immediately. Do you understand? Carol's throat bobbed. Yes, Sir, I'm walking to gate C-19 right now. He interrupted. Do not close that door. The line went dead. For a moment, nobody moved. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. Carol adjusted her scarf, trying to recover authority. All right, everyone remain seated. We're resolving this. But the damage was done. The cabin buzzed with murmurs. A man in a gray blazer leaned over. Ma'am, maybe just let the kid sit till the guardian arrives. Carol glared. Sir, please don't interfere with crew operations. Maya sat rigid, tears streaking down her cheeks. Micah wiped his nose on his sleeve. The window beside them reflected their frightened faces. Two small silhouettes against a wall of indifferent luxury. From outside, the cabin door came a sound heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the jet bridge. The kind that carried weight not just physical, but moral. The passengers sensed it. Conversations hushed. Even Carol's posture faltered. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. And for the first time since boarding began, Carol looked uncertain. The latch clicked. The door began to open. The conference room at Terminal C was a glass box overlooking the runway. Outside, planes rolled past like moving silver mountains. Inside, the air felt still until Christopher Bennett's phone began to vibrate again. He excused himself from the table. "One moment," he said, his voice even. He had been reviewing quarterly safety metrics with his executive team, but the sound in his ear, the tiny tremor in Maya's voice, pulled him somewhere far more urgent. He stepped into the hallway. "Maya, what happened?" Her answer came small and shaky. "She tried to make us get off. Daddy, she said we don't belong here." Something old and raw rose in his chest. He'd heard words like that before years ago, when he was a young pilot in training. The only black man in a room full of uniforms who told him he'd gotten there because of quotas. He had learned to breathe through the sting, to let competence do the talking. But now, someone was using that same poison on his children. He walked fast. The carpet muted his steps, but the tension around him felt loud. Executives turned their heads as he passed. "Everything all right?" Sir One asked. "No," Christopher said quietly, "but it will be." He reached the elevator. The doors closed, sealing him in a narrow capsule of reflection. He looked at his own reflection in the mirrored wall, tall, composed, the gray at his temples showing more than last year. He thought of his wife Naomi, of the promises they'd made about raising their kids to walk tall in any room. He whispered to himself, "Not today." When the doors opened, he was already on the phone with internal security. "This is Bennett. I want a recording of everything that's happening on Flight 882 cabin camera feed included. Gate C-19. Now." The voice on the other end stammered, "Yes, sir. Immediately." Christopher slipped his phone into his pocket and began the long walk down the corridor toward Gate C, back on the aircraft. Carol Hensley was pacing near the galley. The call with Mr. Bennett had left her shaken, but pride stitched her spine straight. There was no way, she told herself, that the man on the phone was actually the CEO. CEOs didn't talk like that over speakerphone. They didn't threaten to remove people. It had to be some prank. Still, she felt eyes on her. The passengers were restless, whispering, filming. Even young attendant Maya Torres stood frozen near row 2, uncertain whether to help the children or obey her superior. Carol exhaled sharply. "Everyone, please remain calm," she announced. "We're clarifying a boarding error." The words sounded hollow even to her. Meanwhile, Christopher's footsteps echoed through the terminal. The overhead speakers droned out flight numbers, muffled by the rush of travelers. He moved with measured pace, his mind organizing every possible outcome, how to de-escalate, how to protect the airline's image, how to protect his family. As he approached Gate C-19, he spotted a cluster of bystanders with phones held high toward the window. A gate agent was on the radio, face pale. Christopher flashed his ID. "Open the jet bridge," he said. "Sir, the cabin crew hasn't cleared. Open it." The agent hesitated only a moment before sliding the key card. The door clicked inside the plane. Carol heard the sound of metal unlocking. Her pulse quickened. "Who opened that door?" she snapped. A male voice answered, calm and close. "I did." But before the door swung fully inward, we rewind a few seconds back to the twins. Maya and Micah sat side by side, fingers intertwined. Micah leaned his head on his sister's shoulder. "Do you think he's really coming?" Maya nodded. "Dad always keeps his promises." She wasn't sure if she believed it in that moment, but saying it out loud helped her breathe. Across the aisle, the woman who'd complained earlier looked uneasy. "Maybe we should just let them stay," she muttered, avoiding eye contact with anyone filming. Young attendant Maya Torres finally stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "Carol, the captain says we can't depart until this is cleared. Maybe we should just wait for confirmation." Carol glared. "You're overstepping." "No, ma'am," Torres said quietly. "I'm just doing what's right." Christopher reached the doorway of the aircraft at that exact moment. He paused, taking in the scene, two children hunched together, a rigid flight attendant standing over them, passengers staring like jurors waiting for a verdict. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then his voice cut through the air low, controlled, and unmistakably authoritative. "Carol Hensley." She turned, startled that he knew her name. He held up his ID, the gold crest of aureus air glinting in the cabin light. "We spoke on the phone." Her mouth opened, but no words came. Christopher stepped inside, nodding once to Maya Torres. "Thank you for standing by," he said. Then to the passengers, "I'm sorry you had to witness this." He crouched beside his children. "You two okay?" Maya nodded, tears forming again. Micah's voice cracked. "She said we didn't belong here." Christopher looked up at Carol. "Is that true?" Carol swallowed. "Sir, I was just following." He stopped her with a raised hand. "Following what company policy or your own assumption?" Her face flushed crimson. "I didn't mean I know what you meant," he said quietly, "and so does everyone here." From the back of the cabin, a passenger called out. She grabbed the kid's bag. Another voice added, "I got it on video." Christopher straightened. "Please send that footage to security, Arius Air, comm, immediately." He turned to Carol again. "You're relieved of duty. Step aside." "Sir, the captain, I'll speak to him next." Carol's shoulders sagged. For the first time, the mask of authority slipped. She looked around as if seeking someone to defend her, but no one met her eyes. Maya Torres guided her gently toward the galley, whispering something the audience couldn't hear. Carol's face crumpled, not anger now, but confusion, the first hint of realization. Christopher exhaled slowly. The anger that had burned hot a few minutes ago cooled into something heavier responsibility. He knew this incident would explode online within minutes. He also knew that how he responded would define not only his reputation, but the soul of the company he'd built. He pressed the intercom button. "Captain, this is Bennett. Ground the flight until further notice. No one departs until federal compliance reviews the incident. I'll handle passenger compensation personally." The pilot's stunned voice crackled back. "Understood. Mr. Bennett." A ripple of whispers moved through the cabin. Someone started clapping softly. Others joined. Hesitant at first, then certain. Christopher looked at his children again. "You did the right thing calling me?" Maya asked. "Are we in trouble?" He smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes trouble is just the truth demanding to be heard." As security personnel arrived to escort Carol off the aircraft, the tension drained from the room. The young attendant wiped her eyes. A man across the aisle offered the twins a bottle of water. Christopher thanked him. "They'll be okay." The man nodded. "Sir, you handled that with more grace than most of us could have." Grace. That was the word his mother had used years ago when teaching him how to face unfairness without letting it turn him bitter. When the door finally closed behind Carol, Christopher looked out the window. The morning light had shifted. Planes were taking off in the distance, climbing into skies that suddenly seemed wider. He thought of how easy it was for dignity to be taken from someone in a single careless moment, and how necessary it was to fight for it quietly, firmly, without hate. He reached for his phone and texted Naomi, "Kids are safe. See you tonight." Then he turned back to the passengers. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "We'll make this right." Outside, news alerts were already lighting up screens across the terminal's CEO grounds, his own flight after racial bias incident, and somewhere deep inside him, Christopher knew this was only the beginning. The hum of the airport felt different now. It was no longer just the chorus of luggage wheels and departure calls. It was the sound of whispers following Christopher Bennett as he walked down the long glass corridor. He had left the aircraft under escort of federal officers, leaving his children in the care of an attendant he trusted. Now he was heading toward the security office, each step heavy with a mix of anger, exhaustion, and control. He had been calm in front of the cameras, calm before the passengers, calm for his kids, but inside, the storm still churned. Years of progress and change, of speeches about equality and inclusion, and yet his own daughters had been treated like intruders on a plane bearing his name. A staff member jogged beside him, panting slightly. "Mr. Bennett." The media already picked it up. Someone posted a video from inside the cabin. "It's everywhere, Twitter, TikTok, the news alerts I know," he said. His tone was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Just get me the original footage and the full crew report." "Yes, sir." He turned a corner, glancing at the large digital screens showing flight statuses. Flight 882. His flight flashed in red ground hold. Seeing those words made something twist in his chest. The sight of it was both humiliating and necessary. Sometimes you had to break your own machine to fix what's inside it. Near Gate C-17, a group of employees recognized him. They stiffened, unsure whether to greet him or hide behind their tablets. He stopped briefly. "Keep working," he told them gently. "Nothing fixes itself by standing still." When he reached Gate C-19, he saw his reflection on the glass again. Same tailored suit, but the eyes looked tired. He thought of his mother back in Montgomery, who used to tell him, "Chris, there will be days when dignity feels like a heavy coat in summer, wear it anyway. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and walked through the door, inside the Holden area. Carol Hensley sat at a narrow table, flanked by 2 federal officers. Her hands were folded, trembling slightly. She looked older than she had an hour ago. Across from her, a young legal officer from Aureus Air was typing notes. The moment Christopher entered, the room seemed to shrink. Carol's eyes lifted to meet his, then darted away. "Mr. Bennett," the officer greeted, "standing. We're taking formal statements. Would you like to participate?" "Yes." He took the seat opposite Carol. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the air vent filled the silence. Carol tried to steady her voice. "Sir, I didn't know they were your children. I thought you thought they didn't belong." He finished quietly. Her lips quivered. "It wasn't like that. I just wanted to make sure of what." His voice was low but unflinching. "That the faces in first class fit your idea of who belongs there." She flinched. "I followed protocol." "No," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You followed prejudice." The words hung in the air. The officer looked down at his clipboard. Carol's eyes filled with tears she couldn't blink away fast enough. "Sir, I've worked here 22 years. I've seen frauds, people lying about seats. And did they look like my daughters?" The question pierced deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Christopher sighed. "You see, Carol, this is why change never sticks, because people keep mistaking bias for vigilance." He turned to the officer. "She'll cooperate with your report. Once it's done, her employment status will be reviewed according to federal compliance standards." Carol whispered. "So that's it. You'll destroy my career." He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Pity, maybe, or fatigue. "No, I'll let your choices do that." He stood. "I have children to see." As he left the room, one of the agents murmured to another. He didn't raise his voice once. The other replied softly. He didn't need to. Out in the hallway, Christopher's phone buzzed again. It was Naomi, his wife. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. "The girls are shaken, but safe. What about you?" He paused. The question landed deeper than he expected. Still figuring that part out. Naomi's voice softened. "Chris, don't carry this alone. Make it count." "I intend to," he said, then ended the call. Through the window, he could see the plane still parked at the gate, motionless under the morning sun. Reporters were starting to gather beyond the security line. A few passengers from the flight stood nearby, giving interviews, showing their videos. He adjusted his tie and walked toward the press area. The crowd turned as he appeared. Microphones rose like metal flowers reaching for the light. "Mr. Bennett, is it true you grounded your own flight?" He nodded once. "Yes." "Why take such drastic action?" Christopher looked straight into the cameras. His voice was calm, but each syllable carried weight. "Because if a child can be treated like a trespasser in a seat their family paid for, then something in our system is broken. And when something's broken, leadership doesn't look away. It acts." Flashbulbs popped, questions flew. He raised a hand. "That's all for now. There will be an official statement later today." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of Maya Torres, the young attendant, standing nearby with the twins. Maya was kneeling beside them, helping tie Micah's shoelaces. The sight disarmed him for a moment. Amid chaos, there was still kindness. He walked over. "Thank you, Ms. Torres. She looked startled. "Sir, I just did what anyone should. Maybe," he said, "but not everyone does." Maya smiled faintly. "Your daughters are brave, sir." He looked down at the twins, Maya holding Micah's hand, the two of them leaning against each other. "They get it from their mother," he said softly. He crouched to their level. "You both okay?" Maya nodded. "We didn't cry." "Not much," Micah added. "You came fast." "I always will," Christopher said. As they stood to leave the gate, he looked back one last time. The aircraft gleamed under the glass ceiling, grounded but shining a symbol of something suspended between shame and transformation. He didn't know yet how wide the story would spread, or how many people would watch those two frightened faces on their screens and think of their own children. He only knew this tomorrow would require more than press releases. It would require rebuilding trust from the inside out. When they reached the private exit, a small crowd of employees was waiting, some curious, some worried. One man spoke up. "Sir, what happens now?" Christopher's reply was quiet but resolute. "Now," he said, "we make sure this never happens again." He walked past them, one hand on each child's shoulder, guiding them forward through the noise and the light. That night, as the sun set over the city, videos from Flight 882 reached millions of screens. A caption on one post read, "He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard." And somewhere, watching from home, Christopher's mother whispered a prayer of thanks. Her son had carried his dignity through the storm and taught the world what it looked like in motion. The following morning, the sun broke through the high glass windows of Aureus Air's headquarters, painting long golden lines across the marble floors. The world outside was still buzzing with headlines, but inside, everything was strangely quiet. Employees avoided eye contact as Christopher Bennett walked through the corridor toward the boardroom. The video from Flight 882 had become the top story in America. Overnight, more than 30 million views and countless discussions about race, privilege, and leadership. He'd slept barely 2 hours. When he closed his eyes, he kept seeing his daughters' faces, Maya's trembling chin, Micah's small fingers gripping the armrest, the shock in their eyes when they were told to get off the plane. He had seen fear before in investors, competitors, even himself, but never in his children. His assistant, Jordan Lee, followed with a stack of reports. "Sir, public sentiment is 92% supportive," she said carefully. "But shareholders are panicking. The morning meeting will be tense. Let them be." Christopher replied, "Sometimes discomfort is where truth begins." When he pushed open the boardroom door, a dozen faces turned toward him. Some looked defensive, others ashamed. Harold Quinn, the chief operations officer, cleared his throat. "Chris, we all agree what happened was unacceptable. But grounding a flight cost us 6 figures in losses and triggered compliance penalties. The media's calling this a scandal." Christopher took his seat at the head of the long table. "A scandal," he said slowly, would have been pretending it didn't happen. A silence settled. Lydia Ramos, head of HR, spoke next. "The union wants assurance this won't turn into a witch hunt. The attendants are terrified." "Good," Christopher said, looking directly at her. "Let them be afraid just long enough to understand what real accountability feels like. Then we teach them better." He opened his folder, sliding a document across the table. "Effective immediately. All flight crews will undergo empathy and bias response training. Independent auditors will review all discrimination complaints from the past 5 years. Harold frowned. That's going to open old wounds. Christopher met his gaze. Wounds don't heal by covering them. Harold, they heal when they're cleaned. A younger board member, Jenna Whitmore, spoke gently. Sir, this could be historic if we handle it right. We can use this to rebuild trust, to make Aureus a model of fairness in aviation. Christopher nodded slightly. That's exactly what we'll do. He paused, scanning the room. And we'll start with the people who made the right choice that day, like Maya Torres. She'll be promoted to senior cabin trainer. I want her to lead the new ethics and empathy program. Gasps rippled through the room. Lydia blinked. Sir, she's 24, and she remembered what humanity looks like when others forgot. That's senior enough for me. For the first time since the meeting began, a flicker of pride crossed his face. As the session ended, Christopher lingered at the window. Down below, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars, people, planes landing and taking off in the distance. Yet everything had changed. He thought about calling Naomi again, but she texted earlier. Take care of your company like you take care of your kids. Protect it from what you saw yesterday. He smiled faintly and left the room. By noon, he was back at the airport, this time in a press conference hall. The emblem of Aureus Air gleamed behind him. The reporters were waiting rows of cameras, lights, and curious eyes. He stepped up to the podium, steady and calm. Yesterday, 2 children, my daughters, were told they didn't belong in a seat they had every right to occupy. Not because of a mistake in booking, not because of security, but because someone looked at them and made a judgment about who they were. The room fell silent. Christopher continued. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in America, but it will be the last time it happens on my airline. He outlined the reforms: transparent disciplinary procedures, mandatory training, an independent oversight council. But he didn't just talk policy. He spoke like a father. No child, he said softly, should learn the meaning of prejudice at 30,000 feet. The emotion in his voice caught even the journalists off guard. Cameras clicked, but for once, no one shouted questions. When he stepped away from the podium, Maya Torres was waiting backstage. She had traded her uniform for a simple blazer, but her hands were still trembling. Sir, she said, I just wanted to thank you for not letting it slide. He looked at her kindly. Don't thank me, Ms. Torres. Thank yourself for remembering what right looks like. She hesitated. The girls, they're okay. They're home, he said, and they'll heal. But what we do next will decide how many other kids never have to feel that way. Later that evening, Christopher returned home to find Naomi reading on the couch while the twins built Lego towers nearby. The moment they saw him, both girls jumped up. Maya spoke first. Did they fire her? She's being investigated, he said gently. But we're not celebrating someone's downfall. Okay? We're celebrating doing the right thing. Micah frowned. It's still not fair. No, it's not, Christopher admitted, kneeling down beside them. But fairness isn't automatic. People like us have to build it again and again. Naomi watched silently, her eyes soft with pride. You did good, Chris. He exhaled, a small, tired laugh escaping. Still doesn't feel like enough? She closed her book and came closer. Then, make it enough. Keep going. The next morning, The Johnson Twins Foundation was officially announced a fund dedicated to protecting young travelers and promoting empathy education for airline staff nationwide. Donations poured in. Messages flooded Arias Air's inbox from parents, activists, and ordinary passengers who had seen themselves in those frightened girls. Weeks passed, and change began to ripple quietly through the industry. Other airlines called, asking for copies of Arias's new protocol. Universities invited Christopher to speak about leadership and justice. He turned down most interviews, focusing instead on internal reform. But one afternoon, a letter arrived handwritten with careful, looping penmanship. It was from Carol Hensley, mailed from a correctional rehabilitation program. Mr. Bennett, it read, I wanted to say I'm sorry, not because I was caught, but because for the first time in my life, I realized what I'd become blind to. Those girls' eyes still haunt me. I'm trying to be better. Thank you for forcing me to see. Christopher sat quietly after reading it, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. For a long moment, he just stared out the window, watching the light move across the skyline. Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer right beside a drawing his daughters had made of an airplane with smiling faces inside. That night, he stood in the backyard, listening to the distant hum of departing flights overhead. The air smelled faintly of rain. Naomi came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. You think the world will ever change? She asked softly. He looked up at the sky, at the blinking lights crossing the darkness. Maybe not all at once, he said, but sometimes it takes one grounded plane to make 1,000 fly fairer. She smiled against his shoulder. That sounds like something you'd say in a speech. He chuckled. Maybe I'm done giving speeches. Then what now? He turned, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Now, we live the lesson. The twins' laughter drifted through the open door. Inside, the TV replayed an evening news segment showing Christopher's press conference. The caption below his calm face read, Integrity at 30,000 feet. And as the camera panned upward, catching the image of a plane ascending into the orange dusk, the anchor's voice said, Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it simply takes flight. The world didn't know it yet, but this moment, the calm after the storm, wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something larger. 2 months later, spring had settled over Atlanta like a soft blanket. The trees along Peachtree Street were blooming, and the city hummed with the rhythm of renewal. For Christopher Bennett, that renewal had been both public and deeply personal. The reforms at Arias Air were underway, but the emotional weight of what had happened still followed him everywhere into meetings, interviews, and even his quiet moments at home. On a bright Thursday morning, he stood behind a curtain backstage at the Atlanta Civic Center, adjusting his tie. The hall was packed executives, pilots, flight attendants, civil rights leaders, and parents from across the country. The event was called Dignity in the Skies, organized by the Johnson Twins Foundation in collaboration with the Department of Transportation. He could hear the murmurs of the audience outside, the rustle of papers, the occasional cough. Naomi's voice echoed faintly in his mind. Don't just talk about change. Chris, show them how to feel it. A young organizer peeked through the curtain. Mr. Bennett, you're up in 2 minutes. He nodded. Thank you. He took a slow breath and stepped out into the light. The applause began before he even spoke. Cameras flashed, but this time they didn't feel invasive. They felt like witnesses. He looked across the sea of faces. Some were hopeful, some skeptical, but all were listening. "When I was 11, he began, his voice steady and warm. "My mother took me on a bus trip from Montgomery to Chicago, somewhere in Kentucky. The driver told us to move to the back because a special group was boarding. My mother smiled politely, gathered our things, and whispered to me, 'Christopher, sometimes we take a step back today so someone else can step forward tomorrow.'" The audience leaned in. He continued, "Decades later, my own children were told to leave a seat they'd rightfully earned. Different vehicle, same wound." He paused. "And that, my friends, is why I grounded that plane, because no parent should have to watch history repeat itself at 30,000 feet." A soft murmur swept through the crowd. Christopher went on, voice deepening. "We talk about safety in aviation all the time. Seatbelts, protocols, checklists. But what about the safety of belonging? The safety of dignity? Isn't that just as vital?" He let the silence hang before continuing. "Every child who boards a plane should feel safe enough to look out the window and dream. Every employee should be trained not just to serve food or check tickets, but to recognize the humanity in every face they meet." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras zoomed in on his expression, focused, calm, but alive with conviction. He shifted slightly, gesturing to a large display screen that showed the Aureus Air logo beside the Johnson Twins Foundation emblem. "Today, I'm proud to announce the Sky Equity Alliance, a coalition of airlines, advocacy groups, and educators working together to end racial bias in air travel. Starting next month, all member airlines will implement the Fly Fair initiative, ensuring real accountability and transparent incident review." Behind him, a short video played clips of smiling passengers, diverse crews, and training sessions in progress. Then, a still image appeared: Maya and Micah sitting side by side on a plane, holding hands, looking out the window at the clouds. Christopher's voice softened. "These are my children, and when I look at them, I see not just my legacy, but our responsibility." The hall was silent. Then, slowly, people began to rise one by one, then rose at a time until the whole room stood in a quiet ovation. Afterward, as the audience dispersed, people lined up to shake his hand. Among them was Secretary Janet Holden, who smiled warmly. "Mr. Bennett, I've attended hundreds of conferences in my career, but this felt like a movement." Christopher smiled faintly. "Let's hope it becomes one." Later, in a quiet corner of the venue, Maya Torres found him. She looked different, more confident. Her hair tied neatly, a new badge on her blazer reading Director of Crew Culture and Ethics. "Sir," she said, her voice full of respect, "I never thought one small act could ripple this far." Christopher chuckled softly. "Neither did I. But sometimes it takes one person to hold the line of decency for the rest to see where it is." She smiled. The twins must be proud. He looked toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the floor. "They are, but I think they're also learning what forgiveness looks like." Maya tilted her head. "Forgiveness? Yes," he said quietly, "even for the people who hurt them. If we want lasting change, we can't build it on bitterness." Outside, the city's skyline shimmered. A plane crossed overhead, its contrail tracing a silver line across the sky like a wound that had begun to heal. That evening, back at home, Naomi had prepared dinner on the patio. The twins were helping set the table, chattering excitedly. "Daddy Micah called. We saw you on TV. Grandma cried. Christopher laughed, scooping him up. She cries every time someone mentions Montgomery. Maya grinned. Mom said you made history. He smiled at Naomi. I just told the truth. Naomi shook her head gently. No. Chris, you reminded people that truth still matters. They ate together as the city lights began to glow. The laughter of the twins filled the air, mixing with the soft rustle of trees. For the first time in months, Christopher felt something close to peace. After dinner, he stepped into his study. The letter from Carol Hensley still sat in his drawer. He unfolded it, reread the words, and then, without bitterness, placed it into a small wooden box labeled Lessons. On his desk was a fresh stack of papers proposals for diversity scholarships, mentorship programs, and youth internships at Arrayas Air. He began signing them one by one. Each signature felt less like bureaucracy and more like a promise. Hours later, when the house had gone quiet, Naomi found him still awake, looking at a photo of the twins from the day before the flight, their smiles wide, their innocence intact. Still working, she asked softly. Just finishing a few things. She walked closer and placed her hands on his shoulders. You can rest now, you know. He looked up at her and smiled. Not yet. There's one more thing I have to write. He reached for a blank page and began drafting a letter. The words came slowly but surely. To every parent who's ever had to explain why the world sometimes treats their child differently, this fight is for you. To every worker who stood up when it was easier to stay silent, you are the change. And to my daughters, thank you for reminding me that leadership begins at home. He signed his name, folded the letter, and slipped it into the lessons box. The next morning, that letter would be printed in major newspapers across the country. Within days, the Sky Equity Alliance gained 23 new airline members. Hashtags like DACA Fly Fair and Dignity in the skies trended for weeks. But for Christopher, the true victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet way his twins slept that night, unafraid, dreaming again. And as the morning sun filtered through the curtains, the first flight bearing the Fly Fair emblem lifted from Atlanta's runway, cutting through the sky like a promise finally kept. Summer arrived with heat shimmering above the runways of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. For Christopher Bennett, the past few months had been a blur of progress meetings, public praise, and quiet exhaustion. The Sky Equity Alliance was growing beyond anything he'd imagined, 57 airlines now on board, dozens of training programs underway. Yet something inside him felt unsettled, like turbulence beneath clear skies. He was back in his office on the top floor of Arias Air headquarters, overlooking the city that had become both his pride and his burden. On his desk lay a stack of letters, thank yous from parents, employees, and passengers, but also one envelope stamped in red internal report, Ethics Breach Investigation. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a summary of a new complaint, a supervisor accused of racially profiling a black mechanic during a random inspection. The irony hit him hard. After all the speeches, all the policies, prejudice had crept right back into the hangar. His assistant, Jordan Lee, stepped in quietly. Sir, the press is asking for a response. They're already calling it Arias Air's hypocrisy test. Christopher leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. They're not wrong. We promised better. Jordan hesitated. You want me to draft a statement? No, he said, standing. I'm going to the maintenance hangar myself." When he arrived, the air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and summer heat. Mechanics paused mid-task, startled to see the CEO walking through in rolled-up sleeves. Near the back, a man stood with arms crossed. Darius Cole, the accused mechanic. His eyes carried both exhaustion and defiance. "Mr. Cole," Christopher said, extending a hand, "I've read the report. I'd like to hear it from you." Darius hesitated before shaking his hand. "Sir, it's simple. They pulled me off a job, said I didn't fit the clearance profile. But I've worked here 10 years. I trained half the guys who questioned me. A younger supervisor nearby, Brent Wallace, shifted uncomfortably. We were just following procedure. Mr. Bennett, it was a routine check." Christopher's gaze hardened. Routine doesn't mean random when it keeps happening to the same people. Brent looked down, embarrassed. Christopher turned back to Darius. "I can't undo what happened today, but I can make sure you're heard. Effective immediately. We're implementing a peer review protocol for all inspections. No one gets singled out without oversight." Darius's expression softened. "Thank you, sir. Didn't expect you to come down here yourself." Christopher offered a faint smile. "The only way to fix a plane is to see the damage up close. Same goes for a company." As he left the hangar, a few workers whispered to each other. One said quietly, "Guess he really means what he says." That evening, back home, Naomi found him sitting on the back porch with a glass of iced tea untouched beside him. The twins were inside, playing a board game, their laughter echoing faintly through the screen door. She sat beside him. "Long day," he nodded slowly. "Feels like fighting a wildfire with a garden hose. Every time we put out one flame, another sparks somewhere else." Naomi watched him quietly. "Change isn't a moment. Chris, it's maintenance. Like your planes, you check them every day, because even the smallest crack matters." He smiled faintly. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not simple," she said, "but it's worth it." He turned to look at her. "Do you ever worry I'm putting too much of myself into this?" She tilted her head. "I'd worry more if you didn't." Later that week, Christopher attended an internal staff forum. No press, no cameras, just employees, from cabin crew to janitors, sitting in folding chairs inside a training hall. He stood before them without notes. "I know some of you are tired of hearing about reform," he began. "You want to move on, to forget the mistakes of the past, but we can't fix what we won't face." He scanned the room, dozens of faces, some skeptical, some hopeful. "I didn't ground that plane just because my daughters were on it. I grounded it because silence had been flying for too long. And silence," he paused, "is the most dangerous turbulence of all." The room stayed quiet, but several heads nodded. He went on. "Every one of you carries the reputation of this airline, not in your title, but in your actions. We can have policies, we can have slogans, but real change begins in how we look at each other. It's not about politics, it's about decency." Afterward, a young flight attendant approached him, nervous but determined. "Mr. Bennett, I joined this company because of you. My mom used to clean planes here, and now I serve in first class. What you're doing, it makes me proud to wear the uniform again." He smiled softly. "Then we're doing something right." But that night, when the building emptied and the city lights shimmered below his window, Christopher found himself alone with the quiet again. He opened his laptop, scrolling through public comments about the new incident. Some praised him, Others accused him of performative leadership. The noise of the internet was relentless. He clicked open an email from his daughter. Maya. It was just a single line. "Daddy, are people still being mean on your computer?" He chuckled sadly, typing back, "A few, but it's okay. Baby, grown-ups argue when they're scared of change." She replied almost instantly, "Then you keep changing them." He stared at the message, a small smile forming. The fatigue in his chest eased slightly. A week later, Christopher was invited to testify before Congress on transportation equity. Naomi wanted him to rest, but he couldn't turn down the opportunity. Standing before the committee, cameras flashing once again, he spoke not as a CEO, but as a father. "What happened to my daughters shouldn't define them, but it should define how we move forward as a nation. Fairness isn't just policy, it's culture. And culture starts with accountability." When he finished, a rare moment of silence followed. No immediate questions, no partisan buzz, just quiet understanding. As he left the Capitol steps later that day, Naomi called him. "How did it go?" He smiled wearily. They listened. "Good," she said. "Now, let's hope they heard you." On the flight home that evening, he gazed out the window as the plane climbed above the clouds. The world below shrank into soft, golden shapes, somewhere far beneath. He imagined the hangars, the offices, the people, each one a part of the system he was trying to mend. Maya and Micah were waiting at the arrival gate when he landed, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Welcome home, Captain Dad." The sight made him laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. He hugged them tight, breathing in their warmth, their innocence. Maybe Naomi was right. Change wasn't an explosion. It was maintenance. And tonight, for the first time, he believed the sky might just stay clear a little longer. The applause from Washington had barely faded when the next storm arrived. It wasn't loud or explosive, it came in whispers, rumors spreading through the aviation industry like thin cracks in glass. Anonymous blogs began accusing Aureus Air of hypocrisy again. A supposed insider leaked emails suggesting the reforms were cosmetic, claiming that executives had resisted funding certain training programs. None of it was proven true, but perception spread faster than fact. For Christopher Bennett, it wasn't the noise that hurt. It was the silence from a few of his closest allies. People who had once stood by him during the crisis now hesitated to return his calls. Even Harold Quinn, the COO who had worked beside him for years, canceled 2 meetings in a row, late one night. Christopher sat alone in his office, the city glowing faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection looked older now, sharper lines around his mouth, eyes heavy with exhaustion. On the desk lay a newspaper with the headline, "Aureus Air Under Fire, CEO's Vision Crumbling." He closed the paper, resting his hands on his face. For a moment, he thought about his father, a man who'd worked 3 jobs and still found time to coach Little League. He remembered what his father once told him. "Leadership ain't about being liked, son. It's about being steady when everyone else starts shaking." A soft knock came at the door. It was Jordan Lee, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been here since 6 Mum," she said gently. He took 1 cup with a faint smile. "You keepin' track now? Somebody has to," she said, sitting across from him. "We'll get through this." He nodded slowly. "The question is, who's still we?" Jordan hesitated. "There's been chatter from the board. Harold's pushing for an emergency session tomorrow." He looked up sharply. To do what, she lowered her eyes. They might want you to step back, just for optics. For a moment, the air between them went still. Then Christopher laughed softly, not bitter, just tired. Optics, the favorite word of people who mistake caution for courage. The next morning, the boardroom was tense. The long mahogany table gleamed under cold fluorescent light. Harold cleared his throat, eyes darting between his notes and the others. "Chris, you know we respect you, but the company's image has taken multiple hits. Maybe it's time we considered new leadership for public confidence." Christopher leaned back, folding his hands calmly. "You mean the kind of confidence that hides problems instead of solving them?" Harold bristled. "That's not fair." "No," Christopher said quietly. "What's not fair is asking me to step aside for doing what every one of you was too afraid to do. You all cheered when the cameras were rolling. Now that it's hard, you want to disappear." The room fell silent. Finally, Jenna Whitmore spoke up. "Chris, you built this company, and you've rebuilt its soul. I don't care about the headlines. You've got my vote." One by one. A few others nodded. Lydia Ramos hesitated, then raised her hand in support too. Harold sighed heavily. "You're risking everything," he muttered. Christopher's eyes softened. "No, Harold, I'm saving what's worth keeping. After the meeting." He walked through the employee lobby where portraits of past leaders hung along the wall. He paused at the newest one, his own. For the first time, he didn't see pride in that framed photo. He saw responsibility. That evening, he returned home early. Naomi was sitting on the porch swing, reading. The twins were catching fireflies in the yard, laughing, their jars glowing like tiny lanterns. He sat beside her quietly for a moment before speaking. "They tried to vote me out today." She looked up, startled. "What? Are you still? I'm still here," he said softly. "Barely." Naomi reached for his hand. "Chris, you've been carrying the world for months. Maybe it's time to let it rest on someone else's shoulders." He shook his head. "If I walk away now, it sends a message that the fight ends when it's inconvenient." She studied him for a long moment. "You sound like your father." He smiled faintly. "That's not the worst thing to sound like." A sudden clap of thunder rolled across the sky. The air smelled of rain. Maya ran up, laughing. "Daddy, it's raining on our fireflies." He scooped her up, sheltering her under the porch roof. The storm came fast, sharp, silver rain cutting through the summer heat. As the family huddled together, he watched the drops streak down the glass, their reflections glowing from the porch light. Something in that moment shifted inside him. Maybe leadership wasn't about controlling storms, it was about standing steady while others found shelter. The next day, he held a press conference not to defend himself, but to clarify his mission. "I've seen the headlines," he said into the microphone. "They call me reckless. They say I've made too many enemies. Maybe they're right, but if holding people accountable makes me reckless, then I'll wear that title proudly." He paused, scanning the crowd. The truth is, reform doesn't come from comfort. It comes from discomfort, from the courage to keep walking even when the road feels lonely. His words spread across social media within hours. Comments poured in, not all supportive, but overwhelmingly moved. Pilots, attendants, passengers, even competitors began posting messages under the hashtag #StandWithBennett. A few days later, an anonymous whistleblower revealed that the so-called leaked emails had been fabricated by a rival executive at a competing airline. The story flipped overnight. Media outlets retracted their reports, and Arrayas Air's stock stabilized. When Jordan burst into his office with the news, Christopher just smiled. "Let the truth do the work," he said quietly. That evening, a package arrived at his home. Inside was a small model airplane made of glass, engraved with the words, "For the man who taught us to land with dignity." There was no note, no sender, but he knew. It had to be from one of his employees, someone who'd seen what leadership looked like up close. He placed it on his desk beside the letter from Carol Hensley and the photo of his twins. Then, for the first time in a long time, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed himself to breathe. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and somewhere high above, a plane traced its path across a clearing sky. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not the absence of storms, but the strength to fly through them without losing altitude. The following autumn came quietly, the air thinner and cool, the trees outside Arrayas Air headquarters burning with amber and gold. For Christopher Bennett, the chaos of the past months had given way to a strange calm, like a plane that had weathered the storm but was still rattled from turbulence. He stood by his office window, watching a plane taxi down the runway in the distance. It wasn't the roar of engines he heard anymore. It was the silence between takeoff and lift, the breath of uncertainty before flight. That silence mirrored what lived in him, now peace, but not rest. "Sir," Jordan Lee said, stepping in with her ever-present notepad, "the National Aviation Council confirmed they want you to keynote next month's summit on corporate ethics." He turned slightly. "After everything, they still want to hear from me." Jordan smiled faintly. "Especially after everything." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Then we'll give them something worth hearing." As she left, he caught his reflection in the glass, same strong shoulders, but the eyes softer, deeper. The storms had carved lines across his face, but they hadn't taken his resolve. That afternoon, he drove home early. Naomi was on the porch painting a small wooden bench white, her hair tied back, the late light catching strands of silver. The twins, now 12, were sprawled on the grass, their books open, half reading, half talking. He stopped at the gate, just watching them for a moment. This was why he'd fought so hard, not for shareholders or media, but for the quiet right to moments like this. Naomi noticed him and smiled. "You're home before sunset. Should I be suspicious?" He laughed. "Maybe I miss my family." She tilted her head. "Or maybe you ran out of dragons to slay." "Not quite," he said, stepping closer. "They're just smaller now, and sneakier." They sat together on the porch steps as the twins ran to show off their art projects. Maya had drawn a globe wrapped in hands of all colors. Micah had built a small cardboard airplane with "Fair" written boldly across its wings. "Looks familiar," Christopher teased. Micah grinned. "It's your plane, Daddy, but this one never crashes." Naomi smiled softly. Out of the mouths of children. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Christopher went to his study. He opened his laptop to a video call Maya Torres appeared on screen from a training center in Chicago. "Sir," she greeted with a warm smile. "We just finished the final session of this quarter's empathy training. Over 2,000 employees certified." His eyes lit up. "That's incredible. Maya, you've done something that'll outlast all of us." She hesitated, then said, "Sir, we had a trainee today, a flight attendant named Helen. She told me her teenage son was on Flight 882 that day, in coach. She said watching what happened changed how he sees people. He's applying for aviation school now. For a moment, Christopher couldn't speak. He blinked hard, then said softly, "That's the legacy that matters." After they ended the call, he sat in the dark for a while, only the soft hum of the night outside. Then, from his drawer, he pulled out the small wooden box labeled Lessons. Inside were 3 things: Carol Hensley's apology letter, the glass airplane from his employees, and the handwritten note he'd written to his daughters months before. He added a new item, a folded photo from a recent staff event, showing hundreds of Aureus employees of every background, arms linked, smiling beneath a banner that read, "We all belong in the sky." The next week, the summit arrived. The hall was vast, filled with executives, journalists, and advocates from across industries. Christopher stood backstage, waiting for his cue, listening as the moderator introduced him not as CEO of Aureus Air, but as the man who made accountability airborne. When he walked out, the audience rose to its feet. The applause washed over him not as praise, but as affirmation. He began simply, "There was a day when my daughters were told to get off a plane. That day changed my life and maybe, in some small way, changed the course of this industry. But the truth is, I'm not here to talk about what we fixed. I'm here to talk about what we're still learning." He paused, letting the silence settle like gravity. Progress isn't a finish line. It's a flight path. You don't reach it once, you stay on it, and you keep correcting your course every time the wind of injustice tries to blow you off. The audience listened in complete stillness. He went on, voice quiet but firm. "I used to think leadership meant standing above the storm. Now I know it means standing inside it with your people, with your truth, and with enough humility to admit when you're wrong." He told them about Darius Cole, the mechanic who had endured profiling, about Maya Torres, who had chosen compassion over silence, about his daughters, who had taught him that courage sometimes looks like fear that refuses to run. Then he ended softly. "Every flight begins with faith in the crew, in the craft, in each other. Maybe it's time we bring that faith down to earth." When he stepped back from the podium, the applause was thunderous, not the hollow clapping of formality, but the sound of a crowd moved to its core. People stood, some cried, and as he looked around the hall, Christopher felt something lift off inside him, a burden long carried, finally lightened. After the event, he walked outside into the cool evening. Reporters swarmed, but he waved them off, choosing instead to slip quietly down a side street where Naomi and the twins waited in their car. Micah leaned out the window. "Dad, did you tell them about the fair plane?" Christopher smiled. "I might have mentioned it." Naomi laughed. He gave a speech that'll outlive headlines. As they drove through the city, Christopher looked out at the night sky, clear, vast, dotted with distant lights from planes tracing invisible paths. He thought of all the unseen passengers up there, the stories unfolding midair, the hearts learning to trust again. At a red light, Maya asked, "Daddy, do you think people will ever stop judging others?" He turned toward her, his voice gentle. "Maybe not completely, but every time someone chooses kindness instead of cruelty, the world gets a little lighter." Naomi smiled. "That's why we keep flying." When they reached home, the twins ran ahead, chasing each other under the porch light. Christopher lingered outside, looking up once more. The air smelled faintly of rain, just like that night months ago when he'd first grounded the flight. Only this time, the storm had passed. He whispered to himself, "We made it." And somewhere in the distance, another plane ascended, its lights cutting through the night steady, unbroken, free, inside. Naomi called softly, "Chris, come in. Dinner's getting cold." He smiled, closing the door behind him, carrying the peace of the sky into the warmth of home. Months after the summit, life at Arias Air found a rhythm again. Flights departed on time. Employees smiled a little more, and passengers began leaving thank-you notes instead of complaints. The change wasn't flashy, it was quiet, like the hum of an engine that runs smoothly because someone cared enough to fix every bolt. For Christopher Bennett, that quiet was sacred. He'd begun spending Friday mornings walking through terminals unannounced, wearing no name badge, just a plain navy jacket. He liked hearing unfiltered truths. One morning in Chicago, a young attendant stopped him by the coffee stand. "Excuse me," she said. "You look familiar. Are you one of our regional managers?" Christopher smiled. "Something like that." She grinned. "Well, whoever you are, thanks for the new training program. My mom flew last week, first time in years, and she said she felt respected. She never says that about airlines." He nodded, throat tight. "Tell her. I'm glad she came back." As he walked away, he realized it wasn't fame or control that sustained him anymore. It was moments like that, small ripples of change moving quietly through the world. At home, Naomi noticed he slept better now. He'd trade late-night emails for bedtime stories, business calls for long breakfasts with the twins. Yet, sometimes, she'd catch him staring out the window, lost in thought. "Still thinking about the company?" she asked one evening. He shook his head slowly. "No, thinking about the next generation. What kind of sky they'll inherit." A week later, a letter arrived from Darius Cole. It was handwritten on oil-stained paper from the hangar. "Mr. Bennett." They renamed Bay 3 the Integrity Hangar. "Every new mechanic has to take an oath before starting their first shift. No shortcuts on the ground, no prejudice in the air. I thought you'd want to know, P.S. I kept the wrench you gave me. It's my reminder that fixing things starts with holding on tight." Christopher folded the letter carefully, placing it beside the others in his lessons box. Then he dialed Jordan's number. "Get me a slot at the New Horizons Academy," he said. 2 weeks later, he stood before a class of 50 teenagers, future pilots, engineers, flight attendants. Most of them had never seen him in person. He began with a simple story the day 2 children were told they didn't belong. He didn't name his twins, didn't mention his title. He just described what it felt like to watch injustice try to humiliate innocence, and what it meant to fight back with dignity instead of rage. When he finished, a young black girl in the front row raised her hand. "Sir, how did you stay calm that day? I think I would have screamed." He smiled gently. "Because anger burns fast, but dignity lasts. If you carry yourself with it long enough, even people who hate you start seeing their reflection in your calm." The students stood and applauded. One by one, they came to shake his hand. He left that room feeling lighter than he had in years. Back at Arias, Jordan met him in the hallway with urgent news. "You'll want to see this." She handed him a printed email from Maya Torres. A crew member had been filmed intervening when a passenger mocked another traveler for his accent. The video had gone viral. not for outrage but for kindness. The caption read, "This is what flying human looks like." By evening, major outlets picked it up. Instead of scandal, the name Aureus trended for compassion. Christopher watched the clip on repeat, a young attendant kneeling beside a nervous passenger, offering water and reassurance. It was simple, real, powerful. Naomi found him watching it again that night. "You look proud," she said. "I am," he admitted softly. "It means the sky learned something." Winter came. On Christmas Eve, snow dusted the runway outside their home near the private hangar. Maya and Micah decorated cookies in the kitchen while music played low. Naomi placed a steaming mug of cocoa in front of Christopher. "Any plans for next year?" she asked playfully. He chuckled. "Maybe fewer headlines, or maybe new beginnings," she said, handing him a small envelope. Inside was a photograph Naomi standing at the gates of a newly built community center. Sign reading "The Bennett Initiative for Equal Flight Opportunities." He looked up, stunned. "You did this, we did," she corrected. "Funded entirely from donations. Training programs for underprivileged youth who want aviation careers. It opens in March." He reached for her hand. "You've been planning this behind my back? Someone had to keep you humble?" Tears glistened in his eyes as he whispered, "Naomi, this is what I dreamed of. Not an airline that just flies, but a legacy that lifts." The twins burst into the room then, laughing, powdered sugar on their noses. "Dad, come help with the tree." He rose, slipping the photo into his shirt pocket. "Right behind you." That night, as the snow thickened, he tucked the children into bed and lingered by their door. Their breathing fell into the rhythm of peace, a melody he'd once feared he'd never hear again. He stepped outside, the cold biting but clean. Above, the night sky was a deep, endless blue, scattered with stars. A plane passed far overhead, its lights blinking faintly. He thought about how everything had started: two scared kids, a cruel misunderstanding, and a father's choice not to rage, but to lead. Now, the whole world seemed to hum differently because of it. His phone buzzed a text from Jordan. "Merry Christmas. Boss, couldn't have done any of this without you." He smiled and replied, "You did more than you think. Keep the sky honest." When he turned to go back inside, Naomi stood at the door with a blanket. "You always talk to the stars before bed," she teased. "Maybe," he said with a grin. "I think they listen." "Then tell them thank you," she whispered, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders, "for giving you back to us." As the night deepened, he felt that old heaviness dissolve, replaced by something quiet and enduring. He knew storms would come again. Prejudice didn't vanish overnight, but somewhere out there. People had learned how to land with grace, and that, he thought, was enough. Inside, the fireplace crackled. The twins stirred in their sleep. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine. For the first time since that unforgettable flight, Christopher Bennett felt weightless. Not because he had won, but because he had finally learned how to let go. A year had passed since the storm that changed everything. The world moved on, as it always did. But Christopher Bennett carried the lessons with him like invisible wings, heavy at times, but always lifting him toward something higher. It was a clear spring morning when he returned to the airport where it had all begun. The same concourse, the same gate, though everything looked a little different now. The walls bore new murals of vivid art painted by local students, depicting unity, flight, and hope. A sign overhead read, Arias Air, every passenger, every story. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, until he reached gate 37. For a long time, he just stood there. A flight attendant nearby noticed him lingering. She was young, maybe 24, with her hair tied in a neat bun. "Sir, are you waiting for someone?" she asked politely. He smiled. "No, just remembering someone." She tilted her head curiously. "This gate. You mean the incident?" He nodded. "Yes, it started here." Her eyes widened. "You're him, aren't you, Mr. Bennett?" He chuckled softly. "I suppose I am." The young woman hesitated, then said, "My mother was on that flight. She told me how your calm changed her life. She said she'd never seen strength that quiet before." He was silent for a moment. Then, with a gentle nod, he said, "Tell her she's part of the story, too." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed a call from Jordan Lee. "Chris, the reporters want a quote about the 1-year anniversary. Should I draft something?" He thought for a moment. "Just write this. We didn't ground a plane that day. We grounded prejudice and we're still keeping it from taking off again." "Got it," she said, her voice warm. "By the way, Naomi says don't be late. The kids are waiting." He smiled. "On my way." As he turned to leave, a group of passengers passed by, diverse, chatty, unaware of the history beneath their feet. He watched them board, realizing that was the beauty of change when it worked. It stopped needing to announce itself. Outside the terminal, the sun was bright, the air alive with the scent of jet fuel and coffee. He climbed into his car and headed toward downtown Atlanta, where the new Bennett Aviation Center for Equity was opening that afternoon. The center stood as a glass and steel symbol of what justice could build when nurtured by empathy. Inside, hundreds of guest students, airline staff, and journalists filled the main hall. Naomi stood at the podium, radiant in a soft gray suit, ready to begin the dedication ceremony. When Christopher arrived, applause rippled through the crowd. He raised a hand modestly, joining Naomi on stage. She leaned close and whispered, "You know, I practiced this speech for weeks, but I think you should start." He shook his head. "No, this one's yours." She smiled, taking the microphone. "A year ago, my husband taught the world that sometimes grounding a plane is the only way to make it fly right again. Today, we take that message further. This center isn't about what was broken. It's about what we can build a generation that refuses to look away when they see wrong." The audience erupted in applause. Naomi continued, introducing scholarship recipients and new programs training young people from underserved communities to become pilots, mechanics, aviation lawyers, and engineers. When she finished, she turned to Christopher. "Would you do the honor?" He stepped forward, hand resting lightly on the wooden podium. "When this journey began, I was angry," he said softly, "not at a person, but at a system that could humiliate innocence and reward arrogance. But anger doesn't build, it burns. And somewhere along the way, I realized something simple: you can't fly higher by pushing others down." The room fell silent. He looked out across the crowd faces of every shade and story and continued, "So we built this, a place to remind the world that dignity doesn't need permission to board, that fairness isn't a privilege, it's a flight plan, and that every child who dreams of touching the clouds should know the sky belongs to them too." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Maya and Micah ran to the stage, throwing their arms around him. Naomi joined, her eyes glistening. For a brief, perfect moment, the four of them stood together, family framed against the symbol of something larger than themselves. Later, as the guests mingled, Christopher stepped outside for air. Across the street, a group of journalists waited near the fountain. One of them, a young black reporter, approached timidly. "Mr. Bennett, I don't need a quote," she said. "I just wanted to say, my brother was treated unfairly at an airport years ago. Watching you handle what happened gave him the courage to file a complaint. He won. He said you helped him believe people like us can fight back with grace." He smiled faintly. "Then he helped me too." As she walked away, he noticed something else, a familiar figure near the gate of the courtyard. It was Harold Quinn, his former COO, who had quietly resigned months before. For a second, Christopher froze. Then he walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said carefully. Harold gave a small, uneasy smile. "I didn't come for photos, just to say, you were right. I was afraid of losing comfort. You were fighting for something worth losing for." Christopher nodded. We both learned something. Then Harold extended a hand. "For what it's worth, thank you for showing me what leadership really looks like." Christopher shook his hand firmly. "No hard feelings. Harold, the door's always open." When Harold walked away, Christopher turned his gaze upward. Planes crossed above, weaving silver lines against the afternoon sky. That night, back at home, he sat on the porch with Naomi. The twins were inside, laughing over a board game. Fireflies drifted lazily through the garden. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "I think you've finally landed." He smiled. "Maybe, or maybe I just found steadier air." She looked at him, eyes soft. "What now?" "Now," he said quietly, "we keep teaching people how to fly without forgetting the ground beneath them." He fell silent, listening to the rhythm of distant crickets and faint airplane hums above. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fix or fight. The world was still flawed, but he had faith that the work he'd begun would outlast him. He reached for Naomi's hand and whispered, "We made it home, didn't we?" She nodded. "Yes, love, we did." And under that endless, forgiving sky, Christopher Bennett closed his eyes not to rest from the journey, but to dream of where the next one might begin. This story reminds us that dignity isn't a privilege, it's a right. Christopher Bennett's calm defiance teaches that real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands quietly and refuses to move. His choice to act with integrity rather than rage turned humiliation into reform, showing that justice is not revenge, it's restoration. In life, we often face moments where prejudice, arrogance, or misunderstanding challenge our worth. The easy choice is anger. The harder one is composure with purpose. But, as Christopher proved, when we meet ignorance with wisdom and hate with grace, we don't just protect ourselves, we build bridges for those who come after us. For older generations, this story echoes something deeper. Every act of respect we model becomes a legacy. The world may not change overnight, but every calm stand against injustice pushes it closer. Remember, dignity is contagious, and silence, when used with strength, can be louder than any shout. Thank you for watching this story of courage, grace, and justice. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so more people can discover stories that touch the heart and remind us what humanity truly means. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter, the ones that heal, inspire, and remind us that respect isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of who we are.